She was turned into kebab meat. Charlene Downs was born in 1989 and moved with her family to Blackpool, England when she was 10. She was described as bubbly, talkative, and from a big family. She spent a lot of her time at the Blackpool Promenade, and it was filled with shops, arcades, bars, and a lot of older men who shouldn't have been communicating with girls her age. On November 1st of 2003, Charlene spent the day with her sister Rebecca just hanging out and doing some shopping. Rebecca decided she wanted to go home for the evening, but Charlene wasn't ready to end her day because she had plans to meet up with a friend. Around 7:15 p.m., Charlene's mother walked her to the bus stop. She stood with her, talked with her, and just wanted to make sure that she was going to be safe. Charlene kissed her mom on the cheek and told her that she wouldn't be home late. Charlene spent the evening with her friend and they went to the Carousel Bar on the North Pier. They were together for several hours before her friend decided to go back home, but Charlene would never make it home. When she didn't return home, her mother reported her as missing, but the police treated her case as a runaway. Police didn't seal off any areas, they didn't check any local CCTV footage, they just wasted days. They ended up speaking with Charlene's friend, and she stated that the last time she had saw her was around 10 p.m. when they had parted ways. Once police looked at CCTV footage around the area, they saw Charlene by herself outside of a bar around 9 p.m. She was seen with an unidentified blonde woman, probably in her 30s, and to this day she has never been identified. Last confirmed sighting of Charlene was around 11 p.m. that day, and after that she just vanished. Police interviewed local teens from the area, and they stated that Blackpool's fast food restaurants were full of older men who would groom young girls. They would trade sexual favors for food, alcohol, and cigarettes. There was a total of 11 local businesses doing this, and one in particular kept coming up, which was called Funny Boys, which was a kebab shop. Two men who worked there, Iyad and Mohammed, became the focus. Police believe that Charlene had been spending time around them, so they conducted a massive undercover operation and they recorded up to 2,400 hours of audio inside of that shop. While detectives were listening to the tapes, they heard them say that Charlene was chopped up and put into the kebabs. In 2007, both men were charged with Charlene's murder, and during trial they were trying to listen to the audio, but it was so muffled and so low that they couldn't come up with a verdict. A retrial was planned, but it collapsed completely, and the judge ended up throwing out the entire case, and those two men were able to walk free. To this day, Charlene's body has never been found, no one has been charged, and there is still a reward waiting for someone to speak up about what happened.
This vampire triple murderer tortured 3 men to death before drinking their blood in a ritual. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murders of David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell. David, Edward and Robert were a group of close-knit friends all living near each other in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. David and Edward both had physical and mental disorders, and because of this they were under the care of social workers. They were considered to be vulnerable adults, but in general they were described as great happy men. Due to his disability, David wasn't able to find work, and so he would make money by going out in the streets and collecting scrap metal and then selling that. And Edward was a very passionate advocate for people living with disabilities. In August 2011, Massachusetts was expecting a really big hurricane/storm, and so the 3 men all decided to make a little event of it. They were excited, and Robert was going to come over to David and Edward's house. They lived together with some beers and some food, and they were all going to sit together, having a good time, riding out the storm together. By the time Monday rolled around, however, all 3 of the men had seemingly disappeared. Edward had missed a scheduled appointment with his social worker, which is something that never happened, especially since he didn't ring up to cancel it in advance, and so concerned, this social worker made her way over to the house. After repeatedly knocking on the door and getting no response, she decided to let herself into the house, finding it completely empty. As she walked through into the sitting room, she would see something that made the hairs on her arms stand up. There on the side was Edward's medication, which hadn't been taken in 2 days, and this was extremely serious because Edward needed this medication. He never missed it. Sensing that something was wrong, something wasn't right, this social worker contacted the police. It wouldn't be until 2 weeks later that police got their first viable lead. That is when a man walked into the police station and confessed to the officers that he had helped to bury some human remains, and when this man took police to the burial site, they would recover the remains of Robert Chadwell, Edward Frampton and David Glasser. They had very clearly been sadistically tortured, slashed with knives, repeatedly stabbed, shot, gutted, and then dismembered. Their remains would be found in around about a dozen separate carrier bags, and all three of the men's decapitated heads were stuffed inside of a single carrier bag. The man who walked into the station and made this confession was able to tell the police exactly who had forced him into helping bury these human remains. He told the police that it was Adam Hall, a local prolific gang member. Months prior to the murder, Adam had already brutally beaten up David after he believed that David stole and then sold some of Adam's scrap metal. Following the beating, off the back of advice from his social worker, David would go to the police and make a report, and this only put a bigger target on his back from Adam. And sadly, only days before the murder, David had confided in his friends that he was terrified of what Adam was going to do. Adam Hall enlisted the help of two men, David Charlo and self-proclaimed vampire Caius Vivus, to get rid of David. They would go to David's house on the night that the storm was expected, and they found not just David, but Robert and Edward there too, immediately making them collateral damage, just in the wrong place at the wrong time. All three of the men would be forced into a jeep and drove miles away into some desolate dark woods. They would be tortured for hours upon end before being shot to death. It was said that while the torture was taking place, Caius was relishing in it. He was a self-proclaimed vampire who also happened to be a Satanist, and he enjoyed drinking not only his own blood, but other people's blood too. After searching his home, police were able to discover evidence that he had extensively researched into dismemberment, and he had many weapons at his disposal, including a machete, an axe, a meat cleaver, and a baseball bat with nails protruding from it, and so much more. At trial, all three of the men would be found guilty and handed sentences of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Upon hearing this verdict, Caius jumped up out of his seat and screamed to the jury, quote, "I'll see you all in hell. Remember that. Every fucking one of yous."
You know it's horrific when the police, the people that are trained to see murder scenes and traumatic situations, when even they say it was the worst thing that they have ever seen, when they don't know if they can carry on with their job after witnessing this. It was Christmas 2014 in Oldsmar in Florida. Everybody was buzzing for the festive season, spending time with family, celebrating and exchanging gifts. For one local woman, it would be the last Christmas she ever had. Maria Suarez Casagne was an amazing mum of three. She truly would do anything for her kids. And one in particular needed a little bit more attention. Christian. He was a very difficult child. Nobody really knew what was different about him. He just wasn't as warm and kind as his siblings. He had no real interest in getting a job, learning to drive, really doing anything socially, or even having a shower and just washing. And things started escalating to the point where he actually expressed that voices were talking to him and telling him things. He seemed very, very paranoid. So understandably, his mum got on the phone to medical professionals, mental health therapists and things like that. But it actually made it kind of worse because nobody could really agree on what was wrong with him. Nobody could agree on a diagnosis. Some said bipolar, some said he was just depressed, others said that he had schizophrenia. It was incredibly confusing. Nobody really knew what to do with Christian, and things got worse and worse. Now, huge trigger warning for any cat mums like me, or just in general animal lovers. Suddenly, out of the blue, one day, Maria came home and found the family cat skinned and buried in their garden. And Christian didn't seem to give a damn. He honestly couldn't care less that he'd done this. He showed no remorse. Maria was absolutely horrified, but Christian kept refusing to take medication and refusing to go to therapy. She was at that stage where she was thinking, what the hell can I do? She was so scared, bless her, that every single night she would go to bed with a knife under her pillow. That Christmas, Maria's eldest son, Mario, came to stay, and things were kind of looking up. On New Year's Eve, Maria headed to the garage to get some boxes in preparation for putting the Christmas decorations away. But Christian wasn't far behind her. Suddenly, Mario's ears pricked up and he was like, is that banging I can hear coming from downstairs? But then he kind of shrugged it off and thought, I must be imagining things. A few moments later, Maria's friend popped round. She was only going to plan on quickly saying hi, and out of the corner of her eye, she saw Christian mopping up red paint. He then just seemed to vanish into thin air. So she was like, that's kind of weird. I'll text Maria to let her know that I'm here. But she never got a reply, and the house kind of seemed quiet. She was like, well, maybe she's busy. I'll come back another day. And she drove off, not realizing that red paint wasn't red paint. Now, Mario was upstairs for a while until he realized, things are a little bit quiet in this house. Like, I haven't seen Mum for a while. He made his way down to the garage and was stopped dead in his tracks. In the garage was an axe, and next to it was his mum's severed head. He rang police immediately to come straight round. He couldn't actually process what he was looking at, bless him. And police sped round the town looking for his missing brother. Now, turns out he'd actually got on his bike and driven round to a neighbour's house, stood with them for a little while, and the neighbours kind of got a little bit disturbed when they looked at the ground and saw that he had blood on his shoes. They were a little bit freaked out. They waited for him to leave and then they got on the phone to police. They had no idea the police were already on the way trying to track this guy down. Finally, they cornered him and they arrested him for his mum's murder. And weirdly, he just calmly admitted to everything. He said he'd swung the axe at his mum because she wouldn't stop nagging him. He ended up being detained for a little while at a psychiatric hospital until he was competent to stand trial. Ultimately, he did take a plea deal. He was given 25 years in prison, but then 10 years of mental health treatment. I don't know what you guys think. Is that justice? For more cases like this, check out my podcast, The Born Investigation.
This 17-year-old girl was held captive for 44 days and dozens of people knew what was happening, but no one ever reported it. Junko Furuta was born on January 18th of 1971 and she lived in a suburban area northeast of Tokyo. She grew up in an ordinary family and she is remembered as being bright and a well-liked student who always got good grades. Junko worked part-time and she was working to save money for her graduation trip, and she had even accepted a job offer at an electronics retailer once she graduated high school, and it seemed like she had a great future ahead of her. On the evening of November 25th of 1988, Junko got off of work and had plans to ride her bike back home. Around 8:30 p.m., two boys were out in the streets looking for someone to SA and rob, and that is when they saw Junko riding her bike past them. They came up with a plan to trap her. One of the boys goes up to Junko and kicks her off of her bike and runs away. Then the other boy pretends to be a random person just watching what had just happened, and he offers to walk her back home. And in Junko's mind, she's like, wow, this is such a great person to offer to walk me home. But instead of walking her home, he leads her to a warehouse and he tells her that he's a Yakuza member, which is a gang in Japan. He then threatens her and tells her that if she does not comply, he will end the lives of her family and friends because he knows where they live, and tells her that he's going to take her inside and SA her. The Yakuza gang was made up of 4 teenagers, and the main person was Hiroshi Miyano, and he was the ringleader and also a high school dropout after drifting into petty crime. The gang decides that Junko is not going to be allowed to leave, so one of the members takes her to their family's home and she stays on the 2nd floor for 44 days. In this home, Junko was subjected to SA multiple times a day, and they even invited other guys to come and SA her. But that wasn't it. They would also subject her to physical torture. Junko was forced to drink large amounts of milk, water, and alcohol until she threw up, and they also burned her and inserted foreign objects inside of her. At one point, they hung her from the ceiling like a punching bag, and they beat her with their fists, iron exercise balls, and golf clubs. Junko was also forced to eat live cockroaches and drink her own urine. Junko's parents did report her as missing, but the gang forced her to call her parents and tell them that she ran away on her own and she was staying with friends. The home Junko was being held captive at, the guy's parents were there the whole time, and she had to pretend that she was his girlfriend, and even though the parents knew that something wasn't right, they never reported anything. There was a night where all 4 members got drunk, so Junko came up with the idea to crawl downstairs and call police, but one of the members caught her and he lit her on fire and slammed her head against concrete. From this point on, Junko was malnourished, she was dying slowly, and none of the boys had an interest in her anymore, so they decided they needed to get rid of her. On January 4th, Hiroshi lost his money in a game, and this made him really mad, so he wanted to take out all of his anger out on Junko, so he tortured her for over 2 hours, and this is what ended her life. He dripped hot candle wax all over her face, then poured lighter fluid all over her body and set her on fire, and at one point she was trying to extinguish the flames, but then she stopped moving. Once Junko had passed away, those 4 boys had wrapped her body in a blanket, then placed that blanket in a travel bag. Then that travel bag was placed into a 55-gallon metal drum. He then filled the drum with wet concrete and drove to a vacant lot and left her there. For nearly 3 months, Junko's body was never found. In 1989, 2 of the members were being arrested for a crime involving a different woman, and one of the boys ended up confessing to what happened to Junko. Investigators ended up locating the concrete drum, and all 4 members were tried as juveniles since they were under 20 years old. Hiroshi Miyano was first sentenced to 17 years, but then it was bumped up to 20 years, and the 3 others were sentenced between 5 to 10 years.
She hired a hitman to end her millionaire husband's life and somehow manages to get away with it for 12 years. And the way she almost pulled it off is insane. Her name is Aurea Vasquez, and on paper, she is this gorgeous pageant queen from Puerto Rico that knows how to work a room. So when she meets this Canadian hotel icon named Adam Ang, who is worth $24 million by the time he's 30, she clocks that and goes straight for the bag. Aurea used her Latina charm to seduce him all the way to the bedroom. And within no time, she is getting showered with gifts. This man even bought her own restaurant that she named Pink Skirt. But apparently being rich adjacent wasn't enough for her. She needed to have it all for herself. So Aurea runs back to her family and she tells them all about her new millionaire boyfriend. And instead of being like, oh my god, congratulations, or wow, be careful, they basically treated it like she had just won the lottery but forgot to cash her ticket. Because to them, Adam was not her boyfriend. He was an opportunity to be rich forever. So they start plotting on ways to get all of his money but make it look like an accident. And the first move is to lock him down with a wedding ring. So one day, out of nowhere, she tells him, I'm pregnant. And her family, they immediately lock into character because all of a sudden now they're all about tradition. They tell him, mijo, you cannot have a baby without a wife. That is not how we do things around here. And Adam, he's Canadian, he's polite and probably overwhelmed, so they quietly got married. And like 2 minutes later, their marriage starts falling apart. Aurea's whole family just moves in. Like they actually packed their bags, they picked their rooms and treated Adam's mansion like it was their own B&B that they forgot to check out of. Her parents, her siblings, everybody taking over all of these bedrooms, probably blasting music, and Adam, he's slowly being pushed out of his own home. But then he finds out the worst news possible. He finds out Aurea was never pregnant. That whole mijo, you gotta marry her guilt trip was all based on a lie. So now he's sitting there like, okay, if she lied about that, then what else is a lie? And he starts getting scared of his own life. So much so that he moves out and rents his own place. He immediately hires a bodyguard and starts filing for divorce, but Aurea was not having any of it. She didn't want a divorce because in her head, she was already doing the math. If they divorce, then she walks away with only $360K, but if he was to somehow magically, I don't know, somehow disappear, then she'd get $8 million. So one night, she asked him out to a dinner just to talk about finalizing the divorce, and he believes her. He tells his bodyguard to take the night off, and Adam shows up to the restaurant later on. But after dinner at around midnight, they're walking back to their car when a man steps out of the shadows with a knife in his hand. This man shoves Adam and starts him over and over in the stomach, the back, chest, everywhere. All while Adam is screaming, run, baby, run. And Aurea, she isn't screaming or crying for help. She's just standing there before getting pushed to the ground. The man disappears back into the dark and Adam just bleeds out right there on the cobblestone. They get sent to the hospital where Adam was pronounced dead. Meanwhile, Aurea just walked away with a minor scratch. But before his body was even cold, she woke up the next morning and sued his estate, as in trying to collect the money. She didn't shed a single tear. Instead, she's filing paperwork. Meanwhile, police are scrambling, trying to figure out who did this. And at first, they think it was a robbery, but nothing was taken. Not his wallet, not his watch, not even his phone. And this part makes me sick. They arrest a 22-year-old dishwasher named Jonathan Roman because he worked near the restaurant, because he kind of looked like the sketch, and because he didn't want to talk without a lawyer. He had no record, no motive, but an eyewitness picked him out, and so they pinned it on him, and in 2007, he gets convicted. And honestly, I would not be shocked if Aurea paid off that witness too. But Adam's dad, Abe, he was not buying any of this. He knew his son. He knew this wasn't random. So Abe starts walking the streets of San Juan himself. He's talking to locals, listening to the rumors, piecing it all together. And one name keeps coming up: Alex Pabon, aka Ed Loco. Witnesses say he's the one they saw that night, not Jonathan. So the FBI tracks Alex down, they confront him, and when they press him, he folds. He confesses everything, saying that Aurea offered him $3 million to take Adam out, saying that her sister Marcia helped plan it and that Marcia's boyfriend Jose coordinated the whole thing. But by then, Aurea fled to Italy, which is a country that refuses to extradite if there's any chance of the death penalty. And for years, it actually looked like she was gonna get away with it. Until 2013, the FBI sets a trap. They had found out that she was working as a tour guide for the Jewish heritage trips in Europe. So they offer her a fake job, and all she has to do is just meet up with a group of American tourists in Spain. She accepts it, she gets on the flight, and the second she gets in Madrid, arrested. 5 years later, she is finally convicted and sentenced to life in prison. And the same went for her sister Marcia and the boyfriend Jose. But it took 13 years. Imagine how many people got away with this. Crazy.
He ended his sister's life because his Xbox was lagging. 19-year-old Alexis Brianna Watkins was from Macon, Georgia, and she lived in a home with her family. This included her mother LaToya, her 16-year-old brother Kevin, her 13-year-old brother, and her son. Alexis was described as outgoing and just had this zest for life. She was in a relationship with her high school sweetheart, and the two would end up getting engaged, and she would have her firstborn son. She poured her heart and soul into becoming the best mother that she could be for her son. With her partner, they were a very tight-knit and loving family. On February 2nd of 2018, Alexis's 16-year-old brother Kevin returned home from school and wanted to play with his Xbox. He started to get really angry because his game was lagging, and he assumed it was because there was too many people on the Wi-Fi, so he went ahead and changed the password so that no one else could use it. Their 13-year-old brother just realized what he had just did, so he went to go tell their mother. Once their mother found out about this, she unplugged the internet router and went to Kevin's room and took out his Xbox. This made Kevin even more angry, and he confronted his mother, trying to fight her, but then he pushed her to the side and said, "I don't want to hit you." Alexis stepped in to save their mom and grabbed Kevin in a bear hug and told him to chill out. At this point, Kevin is in a fit of rage, and he has his sister in this prolonged chokehold lasting 15 minutes. Their mother and 13-year-old brother tried to separate the two, but Kevin told her that if she were to intervene, he would hurt her, so she ran to call 911. As she was waiting for police to arrive, Kevin still had this tight grip on his sister's neck. Once police arrived, Alexis was unconscious, her body was limp, and Kevin was refusing to let go of her. Once officers told Kevin to release his grip, he did, but it was already too late. Alexis was rushed to the hospital. They were able to resuscitate her, and she was sent to the ICU. She had a condition resulting of lack of oxygen to the brain, and unfortunately the next day she passed away. Authorities immediately arrested Kevin, and he was charged with the murder of Alexis. Ultimately, the judge found Kevin guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
His crimes were so horrific that not even all the details could be released to the public. Serial killer Albert Fish has been described as the most evil and disturbing individual to ever live. He committed the most terrible crimes against children that I've ever read, and then he sent a letter to his victims' parents describing in gruesome detail what he did to their child. Albert Fish was born on May 19, 1870 in Washington, D.C. His father was 75 years old when he was born and 43 years older than his mother. His father passed away when he was only 5 years old, and then his mother was struggling so much that she gave him up to an orphanage for 4 years. The orphanage was absolutely terrible. Albert was being abused by the staff and other children every single day. But it was here that he realized that he got pleasure from pain and seeing other people in pain. In his early 20s, he moved to New York and became a male S-worker, and it was here that he said he began to regularly essay children under 6 years old. Albert said at this time that his victims were homeless children, orphans, African American, or mentally disabled, children that Albert felt like the police wouldn't investigate if they were hurt, essayed, or vanished. When Albert was 28 years old, his mother arranged for him to marry a 19-year-old girl, and together they had 6 children. Even after Albert was arrested, all of his children described him as being a great man, and when you hear the details about what he did, you're definitely going to be side-eyeing that comment a little bit. After a few years of marriage, Albert's wife actually left him for another man. He did remarry, but his second wife actually divorced him after only 10 days of marriage. And in a time where divorce was incredibly rare, I think this really shows what kind of man he was. Albert's mental health was declining rapidly. He was extremely mentally ill. Albert began to have delusions that God was telling him to hurt himself and others, especially children. He would put needles in his body, all over his body, including his own manhood. He crafted a paddle with nails sticking out of it, and he would hit himself with this paddle and even instructed his own children to hit him with the paddle. It was also around this time that Albert got interested in the idea of eating people. When he was around 40 years old, he started a relationship with a mentally disabled 19-year-old boy named Thomas Keaton. After he earned Thomas's trust, he held him captive in an abandoned area for 2 weeks where he tortured him, and then he cut off half of Thomas's manhood and then just left him there. To this day, it's unknown what happened to Thomas after this and if he even survived. At this point, Albert had gone undetected for decades and he became more confident and bold. On July 14th, 1924, he kidnapped the 9-year-old son of a police officer named Francis McDonald, so very different victim than he previously had abducted. His body was found shortly later by a group of Boy Scouts and he had been essayed as well. And since Francis came from a respected family, his case was being properly investigated. Actually, over 250 officers, including his own father, were assigned to his case, but it sadly went cold quick. About 3 years later, a 3-year-old boy named Billy Gaffney was playing in his apartment building with one of his friends when both of the boys vanished. His friend was found shortly later on the roof of the apartment building, and when they asked the child what happened to 3-year-old Billy Gaffney, the child said the boogeyman took him. Billy Gaffney's remains were never found, but later Albert did confess what he did to Billy, and it is easily the most horrific, disturbing thing I have ever read. Not all the details of what 3-year-old Billy endured were released to the public because they were that gruesome, and it honestly shocks me because what was released to the public is completely brutal. The toddler suffered horrific torture before succumbing to his injuries, and this is the first known time of Albert eating one of his victims. The 1920s in America is known as the Great Depression. American families were suffering financially like we'd never seen before, and that included that of the Budd family. So their 18-year-old son put a classified ad in a newspaper looking for work, and within days received a response from the 58-year-old Albert Fish going by a different name. He offered the young boy work at his farm, a farm that did not exist. Albert visited the Budd family household to pick up the young man to take him to his farm with the intention of the young man being his next victim. But when he was introduced to the young man's family, he met the young man's 10-year-old sister, Grace Budd. Albert told the family that plans actually changed and he had to go to his niece's birthday, and he asked if 10-year-old Grace would want to go with. He said that he would bring her back later that evening to take her brother back to the farm for his new job. Grace's father agreed to let the stranger leave with his 10-year-old daughter and asked for the address of the party. When the stranger and their daughter never returned home, her father went to the address that the man had given, the address of the party, and realized that that address did not exist and that his child had been kidnapped. 7 years would go by and Grace would never be found. The family was still grieving the loss in November of 1934 when they received a letter that described in gruesome detail how Albert killed and ate their daughter. I mean, that is just something that is impossible to even imagine. But the envelope that the letter was sent in was able to be easily tracked back to Albert Fish, and he was arrested. During Albert's trial, his defense tried to claim that he was mentally unwell and was legally insane, and although the jury did believe that Albert was insane, they strongly felt that he deserved the chair more. So Albert was found guilty and sentenced to death, and on January 16th, 1936, he was executed at the age of 65 years old. Before Albert's execution, he wrote a statement several pages long and gave it to his lawyer, but his lawyer has come out and said that he will never show what Albert wrote to anyone because it is the filthiest thing he has ever read, and to this day, his statement has never been released to the public. During Albert Fish's life, he worked across the entire country and was actually a suspect in many children's deaths, but anytime they were suspicious of him, he would just move. So to this day, it's actually unknown how many victims Albert Fish has. Some say 15, some say 100, some say 400. But Albert Fish did one time say that he has one in every single state. If you watched the end of this video, thank you so much. You are definitely brave because this is probably the most disturbing video I have ever made and researched. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments. I'm sure you guys are going to have some really strong thoughts. While you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you next time with the next video.
This guy took the lives of 4 students and really thought he can get away with it because he was getting a PhD in criminology. His name is Brian Kohlberger. He's 28, living in Pullman, Washington, and socially, he is not okay. He stays right across the state line from the University of Idaho, and that was not a coincidence, but we will get to that later. For now, just know he picked that location on purpose. Anyways, Brian was obsessed with crime and not in a normal way. When he wasn't in class studying for criminology, he was spending his free time trying to figure out how to commit a crime and not get caught. And I'm not exaggerating. He literally posted an online survey asking former inmates how they picked their victims, whether they planned it, how did they cover it up, what tools they used, and what mistakes were made. And while allegedly planning this entire thing, he had applied for an internship with the local police, claiming he just wants to help analyze the public safety data, when really he just wanted to study how cops work so he could figure out how to never get caught. And then one night, after months of studying how to get away with murder, he decides it's time to test it all out. He picks this house on King Road, and we don't know exactly why he chose that one, but it is where 6 students from the University of Idaho lived. Some people think he chose it because it was in Idaho while he lives in Washington, meaning that if anyone ever suspected him, then Idaho police would have a much harder time trying to investigate someone from across state lines, and that would buy him just enough time to disappear. So Brian continues with the plan and starts stalking the house, figuring out who lives in which room, who parks where, what time do they get home, who stays up late, and which lights stay on the longest. He even memorizes the floor plan, like in detail. And I don't know why, but the thought of someone knowing your house better than you do, and eventually, after tracking them long enough to know their routine better than they do, he picks the night he's going to destroy everything. November 13th, 2022, he pulls up at around 3:30 in the morning in a white Hyundai Elantra. And just like he expected, the lights are still on, so he doesn't park. Instead, he loops around the block once, and then again for the next 30 minutes. It's almost like he was waiting for the exact second they let their guard down to go in. Around that same time, Xana is on the 2nd floor, awake in bed, scrolling through TikTok. She gets hungry and decides to order DoorDash. At 3:59 a.m., her food gets dropped off at the front of the house. But as the driver's leaving, they see something or someone. It's Brian circling the house again, and the Dasher gets a very weird feeling, like that gut deep instinct that something is off. She doesn't say anything and just leaves immediately. A minute later, Xana walks out to grab her food. She comes back inside, and then all of the lights in the house go off. And that is exactly what he was waiting for. At 4:07 a.m., Brian pulls around to the back of the house where it is pitch dark and parks. He gets out of the car while wearing an all-black face mask and gloves while carrying an edged weapon. He walks up to the 2nd floor sliding glass doors, pulls it open like he already knew it'd be unlocked, and steps inside. He moves through the kitchen quietly like he knows where everything is, which he did. He then heads to the 3rd floor and walks into Maddie's room. But what he doesn't expect is that she isn't alone. Kaylee is in there too. They're both asleep together in the same bed, but that doesn't stop him. He pulls out the knife, the one that he had hidden in the sheath of his hip, and attacks him right there while they're sleeping. Meanwhile, Xana's downstairs. She just walked into the kitchen, but then she notices the sliding glass door is cracked open. And then she hears these heavy, repetitive thuds coming from upstairs, and I can only imagine she's just standing there completely frozen. Like, why is the sliding door open, and what the hell is that sound? She starts walking towards the stairs, and somewhere along the way, she either sees or hears him right there in the hallway. Maybe she saw the weapon, maybe the blood, maybe just the look in his eyes, but whatever it was enough to make her run. She turns and bolts back to her room where Ethan is sleeping, but Brian chases her down at full speed. He follows her down that hallway straight into the room that she thought would protect her. And somewhere in that chaos, he drops the sheath to his knife. That one mistake will destroy everything for him, but he doesn't realize that just yet. He storms into Xana's room, and what happens next we'll never fully know, but we do know this. Xana fought for her life. She had defensive wounds. She tried to stop him. She tried to survive. But Brian overpowered her, and then he turns to Ethan, who was likely asleep, and takes his life too. Now, this wasn't part of Brian's plan at all. He was not expecting anyone to fight back. And for a second, he actually sits down on Xana's chair to catch his breath. A few seconds later, he gets up and walks towards the kitchen, but what he doesn't know is that someone else in the house is awake. Dylan, one of the roommates, starts hearing these weird noises. She cautiously opens her bedroom door just enough to be able to peek into the hallway, and she sees him. him. She freezes, doesn't scream, doesn't even say a word, she just stares, trying to make sense of what she's seeing. But the only thing that sticks to her were those dark, bushy eyebrows and those evil eyes. She shuts her door, locks it, sits on her bed, and immediately starts texting her other roommates to warn them, but no one's answering. Eventually, Beth, who's on the first floor, wakes up and answers. Now both of them are panicking, and at some point, Dylan musters up the courage to leave her room and go downstairs to Beth's room. But as she walks through the living room and turns her head into Xana's room, all she sees is a body on the floor. Freaked out, she immediately runs downstairs into Beth's room, and the two of them lock themselves in there for the next couple of hours. They both fell asleep and woke up later on thinking maybe it was all a dream, but they were not prepared for what came next. And look, I know people judge them for not calling 911 right away, but honestly, unless you have lived through a moment like that, you have no idea what you will do. Meanwhile, all of this is happening at around 4:20 in the morning. Brian ran out of that house and drove right back across the border into the states of Washington. He wipes his car down, hides his clothes, probably dumps the weapon somewhere, which by the way, they still haven't found. And by 5:20 in the morning, he is back at home in his apartment. He even had the nerve to take this hideous photo of himself the next morning like he is some star of the next episode of How to Get Away with Murder. But back at the crime scene, police had found the knife sheath that Brian dropped and they send it straight in to DNA testing. But there is one problem. Brian did not have a criminal record, so when they ran it through the system, nothing came up, which honestly must have made him feel invincible, like, haha, you can't catch me. But what he didn't count on is how petty the FBI can be when you try to outsmart them. The FBI had to get creative, and so they used something that's called genetic genealogy. Basically, they took the DNA and then they uploaded it on one of those sites, kind of like Ancestry, not to find him, but to find someone related to him. And it works. They found his dad, Michael Kohlberger, and guess what? Michael only has one son, so now it's not a matter of who did it, it's just a matter of proving it. They trace his car, and it is the same exact white Honda Elantra that they caught on camera that night circling the house over and over again. Then they pulled his phone records, and even though Brian thought that he was very slick for turning off his phone during the murders, he forgot one tiny detail. He turned his phone off while still being near the house, and then he turned it back on again, still near the house. And for someone studying criminology, that is honestly the dumbest move you could possibly do. But it gets worse. Around that same time, Brian had driven home back to Pennsylvania for winter break. Meanwhile, the FBI is stalking his every move, which is actually kind of ironic because all of that time he spent stalking his victims, now he becomes the one to get stalked. They watch him wear latex gloves all around the house. They watch him scrub his car, and they even see him throwing out trash in his neighbor's bin so that way his DNA doesn't get in the wrong place. But it didn't work. The FBI dig through that same trash and they find exactly what they need. They run the DNA and boom, it's a match to the knife sheath. On December 30th at like 1:30 in the morning, the SWAT team bust through his front door. They go inside and they find him still wearing latex gloves, and they see him shoving trash into Ziploc bags. He was still over here trying to erase the 4 lives that he took, but finally it's over. He gets arrested, and for almost 3 years he was swearing up and down that he was innocent, and he was saying that the night of the murders he was outside stargazing. I hope someone knocks him so hard in the head he can stargaze for the rest of his life. But eventually he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. And it kills me that we don't know why he did it, but the main priority is to always remember their names. Maddie, she was the gentle firstborn, her mom's little twin, and the kind of girl who didn't need to say much to be felt. And then Kaylee, the loud, radiant, funny without trying kind of girl, the chaos to Maddie's calm, and her soul sister in every single way. And of course, Xana, the wild child who will literally do a backflip anywhere just to make you laugh, always smiling, always moving, and always full of light. And lastly, Ethan, the oldest to his triplet trio, the protector, the glue to his family, and the one who would notice if you're sad and would just crack a joke just to lift the air. 4 young adults who lit up every single room that they walked into. 4 families who wake up every single day with an ache that never really softens. And their friends who now have to live with the memory of what they saw, what they heard, and what they couldn't stop. Ooh, that part really haunts me. They were just kids and they deserved every single part of their beautiful lives, but then he walked in and took everything.
She was on her way to Disney World. She could not wait. But instead of being photographed with Mickey Mouse, she was photographed lying dead, stabbed to death on the pavement in front of the entire street. Before we get into this case, if you do like deep dives, I post a brand new episode on my podcast, The Born Investigation, every single week. It was a cold winter in Columbus, Ohio in 1973. And one family was like, do you know what? We need some Christmas magic. We want to go to Disney World. Let's go to Florida, escape these freezing cold temperatures, just have some Christmas fun as a family. Little kids, 8-year-old Sherry Swally and her 5-year-old little brother were absolutely ecstatic. They could not wait. And they were really lovely kids, very kind, very thoughtful, very, very well behaved. The kind of kids that really did deserve a break to Disney. Their dad, John, bundled them into the car to set out for the long trip. But because it was such a long trip, he'd planned to make a stop off on the way to get some food, to get some rest. He was like, we'll need to stop for like petrol, snacks, etc. So they planned to stay with his old friend in Atlanta, Georgia on the 23rd of December. Now this old friend was called Clyde Williamson, and I guess the two were like old work colleagues. They showed up to Clyde's house and everything was absolutely fine. Everybody was really excited. The kids started playing outside in the local neighborhood with a load of other children, very like community vibe. I wasn't growing up in the 70s, but it was very similar to when I was growing up as a kid. We'd kind of just go and kick a ball about with the other kids in the neighborhood until like tea time. No phones, no consoles, just outside enjoying other people's company. So a neighbor, Carolyn Ellis, spotted Sherry, the little girl, playing outside, and she was like, hey Sherry, could you run over to Clyde's house and invite everybody over for food at 8 p.m? The little girl said yes. She ran off, and that was the last time she was ever seen alive. She just completely vanished into thin air. Obviously, everybody was frantic, thinking, where could she possibly have gone? Has she got lost? Has she had an accident or something? But nobody could have predicted the horrific truth. They called police and reported her missing, but it wasn't long before a devastating sight. At 8:30 a.m. the next morning, she was spotted, just 40 yards away from the apartment complex, lying there dead. Her body was lying dead in full view of hundreds of apartments. Like, how did nobody see anything? This is obviously what the area looks like now, but it wasn't dissimilar back then. Horrifically, this little girl had been AR'd and stabbed to death. And like, nobody had seen anybody place her body there. Now back then, DNA technology was very much in its infancy. Like, it was pretty much unheard of. It was obviously nowhere near the levels that we've got today. But you'd think that if she was AR'd, there would be something kind of left, some evidence left at the scene, shall we say, as horrific as it is to think. But chillingly, to this day, still, no one has ever been convicted for this chilling crime. And the most haunting part is that if they're still alive, a PDF file and murderer is just out there walking free.
Did you guys know that 5 people, including 2 doctors, were arrested and charged in connection to Matthew Perry's death? And his assistant was just sentenced for his role. Let's talk about it. Matthew was born in 1969 to his parents Suzanne and John. His parents divorced when he was only 9 months old, and it was his mom, who was 21 years old at the time, who primarily raised him. His dad left to go to California and pursue his acting career. He walked out on them, quote, "I'm told my father took me out of my car seat, handed me into my grandfather's arms, and with that, he quietly abandoned me and my mother." Matthew's mom was a busy woman. She worked very long hours and she traveled for work, leaving Matthew with a feeling of loneliness that would stick with him throughout his entire life. But as a kid, as soon as he was able to understand that his family situation was not ideal, that he did feel lonely and like he lacked love and attention that he craved, Matthew developed a side of him, the funny side of him, that he would use as his survivor tool to keep his head above water, because maybe he didn't get the attention that he wanted and needed from his mom, but if he could make her laugh, then that meant something to him. And maybe he wasn't like the other kids because inside he felt more alone than most, but if he could make them laugh, then that was enough for him. And yeah, his day-to-day thoughts were more sad and isolated than most, but if he could make someone laugh, then he wouldn't have to think about those thoughts and he would be able to find happiness knowing that he at least made somebody else happy, even if it was just for a few seconds. Throughout the time that he was growing up, Matthew also lived with a fear that one day maybe his mom would walk out on him too, just like his father did, and those feelings became a fear of abandonment that he fought against his entire life. Even later on in his life, we see this in his romantic relationship relationships. If he started dating someone, for example, when he dated Julia Roberts, he would self-sabotage because he would start thinking that he needed to leave them before they could get the chance to leave him first, because the thought of feeling abandoned was so unbearable to him that it was a mindset of, well, at least it was my choice and I can't be left if I'm the one choosing to walk away. And that's what happened with Julia Roberts. He was so happy in that relationship, but he felt like he never deserved her, so he left her thinking that he was protecting himself from a potential future heartbreak. Quote, dating Julia Roberts had been too much for me. I had been constantly certain that she was going to break up with me. Why would she not? I was not enough. I could never be enough. I was broken, bent, unlovable. So instead of facing the inevitable agony of losing her, I broke up with the beautiful and brilliant Julia Roberts. Matthew Perry was 14 years old when he had his very first drink. He was with two friends, his mother was at home, and he just laid outside on the grass and looked up at the stars. And for the first time in forever, he felt inner peace. The loud negative thoughts inside of his head were not there. His feelings of loneliness went away. In fact, all the feelings went away, and they were all replaced with what felt like pure bliss. He was numb, but he was so peaceful, and he liked that a lot. He was living in Canada at this time, but when he turned 15 years old, he realized that he needed a change, and he really missed his father. His dad by this point was remarried, and he had children with his new wife. But when Matthew and his mom pitched the idea of Matthew moving to California to be with his dad and his new half-siblings, it seemed like a good idea. It felt like a change of scenery would be good for him. So that's what he did. He moved to California, and there he spent more time with his father than he had his entire life. His dad was an actor, and he was also a guy who liked to have a drink. Matthew looked up to him. He started thinking about pursuing acting as his career choice to follow in his footsteps, and he also started to notice a pattern that every single day his dad would come home, and after a long day he would have a drink and say, quote, this is the best thing that's happened to me all day, end quote. So Matthew started doing the same, but there was a difference there because when his dad stopped, Matthew couldn't. So for as long as he could remember, Matthew wanted to be a famous actor, not only because his dad was and he looked up to him, saw inspiration in him, but also because of all the attention that would come with it. Remember, he was someone that craved love and attention from his parents that he never really got, and he was also someone that wasn't confident, was lonely, and fought a lot of mental inner battles. But if he could act, he could make people laugh on camera, which was the one thing that he had always loved to do, and maybe he could get the world to love him, even if he didn't love himself. Quote, there was steam coming out of my ears. I wanted to be famous so badly. You want the attention, you want the bucks, and you want the best seat in the restaurant, end quote. Matthew's dreams came true in 1994 when he landed the role of Chandler Bing on the show Friends. He had acted before on various projects, but this was the one role that he really wanted. He was 24 years old at the time, the youngest member of the cast. He was in desperate need of money, but he was also incredibly passionate. When he first heard about the show and about Chandler's character, all he could think about was that he was everything that Chandler was. All of Chandler's personality traits that his character needed to have on the show, Matthew Perry had in real life. So it was a role that he could so easily play because it came so natural to him. Chandler was someone that had bad luck with girls, someone who made people laugh. He was the funniest. He got uncomfortable with any type of silence. Quote, it wasn't that I thought I could play Chandler, I was Chandler, end quote. When he auditioned for it, he didn't even bring his script with him because he had learned all of the lines by heart. But he got the role, he got the call, and it kind of saved his life. Quote, I don't know what would have happened to me had the call gone the other way. It is not out of the realms of possibility that I may have ended up on the streets of downtown, end quote. And I do not have to explain to you guys how big of a success the show Friends was. Everyone and their mom knows the show Friends. To say that it was successful would be an understatement. The 6 cast members on the show began making a little bit over $22,000 per episode, then $75,000 per episode, and eventually they were making $1 million per episode. On top of that, the dynamic of the actors and the actresses on the show was literally everything that an actor could dream of. They were best friends in real life. They bonded, getting closer and closer throughout the years until they eventually became more like family than friends. They had so much fun on set. They all truly loved and cared for each other. They were always laughing, always smiling, and it truly created for all of them such a magical, real, raw experience. Matthew Perry was on Friends from the time that he was 24 years old to 34 years old, and he was absolutely adored by the entire world. But throughout it all, there was the same constant in him that had been there his entire life, the battles that he fought being dependent on drinks and substances. Matthew Perry was in a bad jet ski accident accident in 1997 while filming for a different show. He remembered losing control of the jet ski, and when he came back to, there were 40 people around him. He was hurt by this, obviously. He hurt his neck pretty bad, and for that pain, he was described Vicodin. I think that's how you pronounce it. He took it, and it did help with the pain, but it also very quickly became something that he not only wanted, but needed. Quote, "It wasn't my intention to have a problem with it, but from the start, I liked how it made me feel, and I wanted to get more." Throughout the next year of his life, Matthew Perry was taking these daily, and he was taking so many of them, and things got to the point in which he began to spiral. He was out of control and very unhealthy, in his own words, not only from the substances, but also from the drinks. He began losing weight because all of his appetite was gone. He got down to weighing 128 pounds, and he started doing things that made him not even recognize himself. For example, on Sundays, he would go to open houses for the sole purpose of going into strangers' bathrooms to see what he could find and take from their medicine cabinets. He lost himself in it completely. He first went to rehab in 1997, and from then on, he was in and out. Quote, "I have spent upwards of $7 million trying to get sober. I have been to 6,000 AA meetings. I've gone to rehab 15 times. I've been in a mental institution, gone to therapy twice a week for 30 years, been to death's door," end quote. So things were getting pretty bad, and even though he tried to be his best self on set, the cast on the show were some of his closest friends in real life, and they noticed. It's not surprising that they noticed, because it would have been hard not to. Matthew Perry said that he had absolutely no memory of 3 full years in which he was filming Friends. Quote, "I don't remember 3 years of it. I was a little out of it at that time, somewhere between season 3 and season 6, end quote. But one thing that he did remember and was never able to forget was a moment between him and Jennifer Aniston when she went up to him and told him that they could smell it on his breath and that he needed help. Quote, "He is one of the most sensitive people I've ever met, more than most girls I know. His feelings get hurt. He cares what people think. It was terrifying watching someone that you care about in so much pain," end quote. Matt LeBlanc, who played Joey on the show, also tried to step in and help. Quote, "I tried to talk to him. There wasn't a response. It's such a personal struggle. They need to bottom it out on their own," end quote. Lisa also tried showing up for him, but what he was going through, those battles, it really sadly is a case of that person is not going to get better unless they want to get better. And that's a decision that they have to make all on their own. Quote, "Hard doesn't even begin to describe it. When Matthew was sick, it was not fun. We were just hopelessly standing on the sidelines. We were hurting a lot. Matthew is one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. He's charming and hilarious. Most of our hard laughs came from Matthew," end quote. Things for Matthew got harder before they got better. In one instance, this is later on in his life, but because of everything that he was taking and doing, he ended up having to be put in a coma for 2 weeks, and he was given a 2% chance at survival. But it was in 2001 when something changed for the better for him, because he decided that he needed to figure out a way to live his life without the drinks, without the substances, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to, or else he knew for a fact that he wasn't going to be alive for much longer. Quote, "I can't describe it because bigger things were taking place that I can't put into words. I didn't get sober because I felt like it. I got sober because I was worried I was going to die the next day," end quote. So one day, while he was laying alone in a hotel room, he called his parents and he admitted that he needed help. He flew back to California and his parents took him to another rehab center. Quote, "It was scary. I didn't want to die, but I'm grateful for how bad it got. It only made me more adamant about trying to get better," end quote. So after Friends ended in 2004, Matthew Perry spoke publicly about his struggles that he had while filming for the show and about how he was doing better and about his intentions to continue doing better, saying that you can't have a problem for 30 years and expect it to be fixed in 28 days. Quote, "You don't recover from what I went through overnight. It's a day-to-day process." So he worked on himself, continued getting the help that he needed, and decided that the one thing that he knew for a fact that he could be good at was helping people. Even if he still faced times in which he didn't know how to help himself, he prided himself in always being able to help others. In 2013, he ended up opening a 5,500 square foot property in Malibu as a sober living facility for men, and he did just that. He helped a lot of people. Quote, "When I die, I don't want friends to be the first thing that's mentioned. I want helping others to be the first thing that's mentioned, and I'm going to live the rest of my life proving that," end quote. But despite his massive efforts to fight against it all, Matthew Perry struggled badly in the last months of his life. In the fall of 2023, he fell back into old habits, and it was October 28th of 2023 that would become one of the hardest days for everyone who knew and loved him. Matthew Perry was found deceased at his home in LA at the age of 54 as a result of accidental ketamine Matthew Perry had been undergoing legitimate ketamine infusion therapy to manage his depression and anxiety, but toxicology reports showed that the level of it in his system were far beyond what would be medically appropriate. Because of that, in May of 2024, authorities opened up a formal investigation into not only how he had obtained it, but why there were such large amounts of it in his system. So, the legitimate ketamine infusion therapy was exactly that. It was legitimate, but because it was actually helping his depression and anxiety, he wanted more of it so that he could feel the benefits from it 24/7, not just when he was doing the therapy. And when his treating physicians refused to increase his dose, Matthew Perry then looked to get it elsewhere, first through two Southern California doctors. 42-year-old Dr. Salvador Plasencia from Santa Monica was thrilled when Matthew came to him for this because he knew that he was famous, he knew that he was rich, and he wanted money. But he was clueless, honestly, about what he was doing, so he reached out to another physician, 54-year-old Dr. Mark Chavez from San Diego, and he tells him, look, if we can provide Matthew Perry with what he's requesting, we are going to be able to make a lot of money. So that's exactly what they do. They start texting each other, so excited about the idea of how much money they can make, saying, quote, I wonder how much this moron will pay. Let's find out, end quote. Then they begin making false representations to a wholesale distributor that will sell them large amount of substances that they then plan on selling to Matthew. They write fraudulent prescriptions in the name of a former patient without that patient's knowledge or consent. Then they get the stuff, distribute it to Matthew outside of the usual course of professional practice and without legitimate medical purpose, without the proper safety equipment, and without properly monitoring Matthew Perry after doing these procedures. Like they once gave it to him through a procedure that they did inside of a parked car in a beach parking lot, completely going against any and all medical training that they had. And then because those two didn't have the time to be with Matthew Perry at all times every single day, they loop in Matthew's live-in assistant, 59-year-old Kenneth, so that he could take care of providing everything to Matthew Perry when they didn't have the time. And that's what happened on October 28th of 2023. Kenneth did the procedure, has zero medical knowledge, by the way, and then he leaves. And Matthew Perry then passes away. When this happens, this is headline news, of course, and all three of them immediately start communicating about how they need to hide their involvement in this, falsifying documents, making up false treatment plans just in case they did need to explain something. One literally texting the other, quote, delete all of our messages, end quote. But authorities figure it out and they arrest a total of 5 people. Dr. Mark Chavez, Dr. Salvador Plasencia, Kenneth, 54-year-old Eric Fleming, and a 41-year-old woman, I think you pronounce her name Josephine. Those last two played a huge part in supplying the substance. Authorities conducted search warrants and found more than enough evidence that all of these people had been involved in fraudulently obtaining and distributing mass amount of substances that they should have never been able to, and every single one of them was found to be involved in illegal activity. DA Administrator Ann Milgram described the pattern at a press conference, saying that as Matthew Perry's dependence deepened, he began prioritizing speed and cost over safety, eventually falling victim to people who were eager about taking advantage of him and his money. An attorney also stated, quote, these defendants cared more about profiting off of Mr. Perry than caring for his well-being, selling dangerous substances, or gambling with other people's lives over greed. This case, along with our many other prosecutions of who caused death, send a clear message that we will hold accountable for the deaths that they caused, end quote. Kenneth, the personal assistant, was sentenced just yesterday, May 27th of 2026, to 41 months, 3 years, and 5 months in federal prison. Eric Fleming, one of the middlemen, was also just recently sentenced to 2 years in a federal prison. The woman, I think you pronounce her name Josephine, was sentenced last month to 15 years in federal prison, more than all of the other defendants combined. At sentencing, she said, quote, these were not mistakes, they were horrible decisions. My choices shattered people's lives and the lives of their family and friends, end quote. Dr. Plasencia was sentenced in December of 2025 to 2 years and 6 months in prison, and Dr. Chavez was sentenced in December of 2025 to 8 months of home confinement and 300 hours of community service. Yeah, everything about it is sad from beginning to end, really. But that is all from me today. Let me know your thoughts on this. I'm curious what you have to say. I'm sure a lot of you, if not most of you, also completely adored Matthew Perry like the rest of the world. But yeah, thanks for spending time with me today and for listening to his story. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
A lesbian love triangle, career criminals, or a disgruntled husband? who was responsible for the callous killing of this woman. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of Chiquita Tate. Chiquita was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana as one of 7 children. Growing up, none of her parents were in the picture. Her dad had never been in her life and her mother was an addict, and so Chiquita and her siblings were all raised by her grandparents. They were raised within a bit of a rough area of Baton Rouge. Most of the houses on their childhood street were all boarded up. It was a high crime and quite poverty-stricken area. At a young age, Chiquita decided that she wanted more for herself and she wasn't scared to put the graft in. She would actually be the first person in her entire family to go to university. She was exceptionally smart and she would graduate qualifying as a solicitor. She had achieved her dream of becoming a defense attorney. With this job, she would defend some of Louisiana's most dangerous criminals, including gang members, drug dealers, and accused murderers. She was determined, driven, passionate about her job, and Chiquita was absolutely unstoppable. Some of her colleagues within the courthouse would actually give her the nickname Queen of the Courtroom. In February 2009, 34-year-old Chiquita was cramming for an upcoming trial. She was set to defend 2 brothers, Darius and Denago Juhard, who were accused of braying and then setting a man on fire, killing him. Because this was such a big, high-profile case, Chiquita put all of her attention onto it. And so on this evening, in February 2009, she decided to stay back at the office in order to prepare for the upcoming trial. At around about 7:30 p.m, Greg Harris, Chiquita's husband, would arrive to her office in Baton Rouge, bringing her a McDonald's, giving her something to eat. He would knock about there a little bit, he'd done some odd jobs for her, before Chiquita eventually told him that she was intending on spending all night at the office, and so he wished her a good night and headed home around about 8:30 p.m. In the early hours of the next morning, when Greg awoke and saw that Chiquita still hadn't arrived home, the bed beside him was empty, he started to worry. He tried ringing her, but she would not pick up the phone. Greg was so concerned that he pulled on some clothes and made the 45-minute journey from their home up to her office to see what was going on. When he arrived, he would spot Chiquita's car in the car park, and looking up into the office building, he could see that the lights were still on in Chiquita's office. But she still wouldn't answer the phone and he couldn't get into the building because it was locked. Greg Harris would then call 911 for help. When the officers arrived, they were able to get inside of the building and, guided by Greg, made their way up to Chiquita's office, where they would come upon a scene that a sergeant present described as, quote, "the most brutal murder I have ever worked on or witnessed." Lay on the floor was the body of Chiquita Tate. She had been sadistically stabbed in a frenzy, sustaining over 40 wounds all across her body, and had her face extensively mutilated. Officers began their investigation, but due to who Chiquita was, they knew this was going to be so much more complex. Of course, their first suspect was Greg Harris, Chiquita's husband, because it's always the husband, and their marriage wasn't as happy as it appeared to be. But then could her murder have been connected to her job as a defense attorney? Did she defend the wrong person? Did she not do a good enough job? Did she upset someone? Or had the Juhard brothers murdered her in order to bide more time before their impending trial? If they were convicted for the charges put against them, they would be going away for life. Investigators were already looking down all of these avenues when they received a tip that they never would have expected. A woman called the investigators and told them that Chiquita Tate was at the centre of a lesbian love triangle, which had gone terribly wrong. I have covered Chiquita's case in full within a brand new podcast episode which is available to stream from tomorrow at 8 a.m. You can listen to True Crime with Caitlin wherever you get your podcasts, and there are already 23 episodes there ready for you all to go and binge right now.
This 14-year-old boy skipped school for the first time ever, got on a train to London, and was never seen again. Andrew Gosden lived with his parents and his older sister in Doncaster. His parents were very religious, but they weren't the type to push their faith on their children. From all accounts, the family seemed very close and happy. Andrew, only 14 years old, was described as being mature beyond his years, deep and academically gifted. The kid was very, very smart. He was a math genius. He got straight A's in all of his classes. He was able to cruise through school and achieve with little to no effort. The summer before he vanished, he was chosen for a young, gifted, and talented program. And when he returned home, he was different, but a good different. He seemed really excited about the things that he learned and the things that he did over the summer. But these weren't the only changes in Andrew shortly before he vanished. About 18 months before his disappearance, he stopped going to church. And a few months before he disappeared, he quit his Cub Scout group, which he really, really liked previously. About 2 weeks before Andrew disappeared, the new school year began. Andrew had a perfect attendance record. He never missed a single day of school in his entire academic career. He never even got in trouble. He was never even late once. Until September 14th, 2007. The day before seemed completely normal. There were no signs that this entire family's lives were about to change forever. Andrew did a puzzle with his dad. He watched TV with his mom before heading off to bed. But the next morning, Andrew accidentally overslept for school about 20 minutes, which he had never done before. And his mom noticed that he seemed irritated that morning, which was really, really out of character. That morning, Andrew left for school in his school uniform, acting like everything was normal, but it wasn't. Instead of walking to the school bus stop, Andrew walked to a nearby park, and he waited there until around the time that his parents would have left for work. After his parents left for work, he returned home. He changed out of his school uniform, put on black jeans and a black Slipknot t-shirt, which was a typical weekend outfit for Andrew, who was a really, really big fan of rock and metal music. Andrew then walked to an ATM. He withdrew 200 pounds from his 214 balance bank account. Andrew then walked to the train station where he purchased a one-way ticket to London. He was insistent on purchasing the one-way ticket, even though the lady working the ticket counter told Andrew that it would have only been 50 pence more for him to purchase the round-way ticket. And for my US audience, 50 pence would be about 60 cents extra for him to purchase the round ticket than the one-way ticket. Andrew boarded that train to London. Witnesses said that he didn't talk to anyone, he just sat alone, and he was playing his handheld PSP video game console. CCTV footage recorded Andrew arriving in London. He left the train station and then was never seen again. It has now been over 17 years since anyone has seen Andrew Gosden. Andrew's school actually realized right away when he didn't come to school because it had literally never happened before. They tried to call his parents since this was so unusual, but they accidentally called the wrong number. Andrew's parents actually didn't even realize that their son was missing until dinner time around 6 p.m. because they thought that their kid was just in his bedroom locked away playing video games. Well, as soon as they realized, they went and they called to report him missing. They were hoping that he was maybe just at a friend's house and had lost track of time. But obviously that wasn't the case. It actually wasn't until witnesses at the train station that saw Andrew's missing person poster that the investigators found out that he went to London instead of school the day that he went missing. And listening right now, you probably believe that Andrew just ran away. I mean, it makes sense. He purchased the one-way ticket to London. He withdrew almost all the money out of his bank account. But it's the other things that Andrew brought with him to London and also the things that he didn't bring that makes me second guess whether or not he actually meant to run away forever. Andrew left his house with his house keys and his PSP handheld video game, but many people question why he would bring his house keys if he never meant to return home. But what's more shocking to me is what Andrew chose not to bring if he was planning on running away forever. He didn't bring extra changes of clothes. He didn't bring his passport. He didn't even bring his birthday money, which would have been an extra 100 or something more bucks. And if you were planning on running away forever, why would you not bring all the tools at your disposal? But the biggest indicator for me that Andrew didn't mean to run away forever, that he meant to come home at some point, is he did not bring the charger for his PSP video game handheld console. For a 14-year-old boy who loved video games, I feel like that would have been a big priority. You would bring the charger for your video game console if you were planning on never coming home. I mean, this is definitely the biggest question mark for me. In this case, why Andrew went to London the day he disappeared is as big of an unanswered question as why he went missing and where he is now. Some have speculated that maybe Andrew met someone online, maybe someone playing Xbox. You know how you can talk to people online playing Xbox? You know, that he skipped school to meet his new friend, but that person wasn't who they said they were. Others have speculated that Andrew went to London to go see some concerts because it was confirmed that some bands that he liked were actually playing in London the day that he disappeared, and that he unfortunately met some foul play along the way. After Andrew vanished, there were some reported sightings of him in London. He was alone, just in London. And if that's true, although it's never been confirmed, it kind of does seem that maybe he did run away because he's just alone in London. In June of 2018, Andrew's family reported that a man had claimed to have spoken to someone online that went by the username Andy Rue, which was a nickname that Andrew Gosden's family called Andrew. This Andy Rue person apparently said that his boyfriend had recently left them and they needed $200 for rent, but they did not have a bank account because they ran away when they were a teenager. Sadly, I was unable to find any more information on this. I cannot confirm if this actually happened or if this person was just a troll. If Andrew Gosden was alive today, he would be 31 years old. At the time that he disappeared, he wore really thick glasses. Andrew also is deaf in his left ear, and in his right ear, he has a really recognizable double ridge. If he was still alive today, he would have the same double ridge. It's like his fingerprint, it would never change. This case was really hard for me to make up my mind about what I think happened. It's so odd, and there's so many unanswered questions. I mean, why did this child who, always did things by the book, changed so many things about his schedule, his behavior, the day that he disappeared? I'm really interested to hear what theory you guys believe the most. You guys are always coming up with things and theories that I would never put together myself. So definitely leave me all of your thoughts, theories, questions in the comments. I'm going to be reading to as many as I can. Definitely going to be looking at what theories you guys believe most. Personally, if I had to pick one, I would probably say that I think he met someone online and that person wasn't who they said they were, but I honestly have no clue. This is such a hard one for me to come up with a theory myself. I'm so interested. I'm going to be reading all your guys' comments. While you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Until then, I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys tomorrow with another video.
How do two young girls who are complete strangers to each other but live less than a mile apart go missing within 1 month of each other? One is discovered dead at the bottom of a cliff along a popular highway. The other is still missing, yet her car was found mysteriously abandoned on that same stretch of road. Their stories are eerily similar, yet police say they aren't connected. But after learning about what happened to Arely Garcia and how she completely vanished into thin air, I can't help but wonder what's really happening on Highway 1 in Big Sur, California. Arely Garcia was 25 years old when she mysteriously disappeared on September 22nd, 2022. She lived in Salinas, California at an apartment she shared with her mom, and being the youngest of 7 siblings, she was really close with her entire family. Arely worked as a service advisor at a Chevy dealership just minutes from her apartment in Salinas. She loved her job and took it very seriously. She would never call out, never no call, no show, and overall she was just really responsible with her job. She also had a very strict daily schedule of waking up at 5:30 in the morning to go to the gym, and then after working out, she would be at her job by 7:30 every morning. But for some reason, on the morning of September 22nd, she broke her typical routine. Security footage from her apartment shows her leaving at 6:34 a.m. and she was wearing black leggings, a black hoodie, and sneakers. She's then seen getting into her bright red Honda Accord and driving away. Right before 7 a.m., Arely texted one of her sisters and said good morning and that she missed her and her godson. She ended the text by saying I love you. After this, Arely vanished, never to be seen again, and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance are strange and really scary. It was around 10 a.m., a good 3 hours into Arely's shift, that her coworkers started to get worried. She and her coworkers were extremely close, more like friends really, and so they started texting Arely's sister to see if she was okay and to let her know that she never showed up for work. This is when Arely's sister saw the text that Arely had sent her just before 7 a.m. At the time, she was sleeping and obviously didn't see it, so she began calling and texting Arely to see if she was okay, but she never got a response. The calls weren't going through, so Arely's sister and the rest of her family went to her apartment to see if they could find anything. Everything was exactly the way she left it, and nothing seemed out of place. No note was left or anything, and this is when they started to freak out. So Arely's sister used the Find My iPhone app to track her location, and mysteriously, it traced Arely to Big Sur. This was really odd to everyone because this was over an hour from her apartment in Salinas, and she had no reason at all to be there. So Arely's family reported her missing to the Salinas Police Department, while her sister went out to her last known location, which was in Big Sur. Just as she was driving along Highway 1, she spotted Arely's bright red Honda Accord pulled over at a scenic turnout. It was abandoned near the Little Sur River Bridge, which is an area where there's not a lot of hikers or anyone on foot. The car was locked with no sign of Aurelie, but all of her personal belongings, including her phone, wallet, and keys, were still inside. There were no obvious signs of foul play, but one thing her family noted was that her car was parked in an odd way. Aurelie's car had a customized suspension system that would allow her to raise and lower the chassis. According to her family, Aurelie would always, and I mean always, lower the car all the way to the ground when she parked, but this time it was raised. Adding to the mystery is the fact that the driver's seat was pushed extremely far back, and Aurelie was only 5'5", so there was no way that she would have been able to drive her car with it being in that position. So the Salinas PD as well as the Monterey County Sheriff's Office were called out to the scene where they began searching for Aurelie. At this point in time, it was dark outside, but they used specialized drones that were equipped with infrared cameras. This would allow them to pretty much see anything at night, and the cameras would detect body heat, but Aurelie was nowhere to be found. Over the next 2 days, both agencies continued to search the 8 miles surrounding the location where her car was found, and they even brought in cadaver dogs, but not a single clue was found. It was like Aurelie vanished into thin air. This was a massive search too, like every cove, every beach, every trail and turnoff was searched. Not a single footprint or even a broken branch indicating that someone may have been walking in the area recently was found. Then police started combing through the security footage at her apartment, which they shared with her family. According to Aurelie's sisters, the last footage of her leaving her apartment immediately stood out to them. She left her house an hour later than she normally would wearing gym clothes. Yet she would have had to have been at work in less than an hour, but at that point there wouldn't have been enough time for her to work out, like she would have been late for work, which is something she never did. And in this video, Aurelie was alone, so what happened to her after leaving her apartment, no one knows. Police then found security footage that showed her bright red Honda Accord driving by a general store in Big Sur around 7:30 a.m. the day she went missing. But unfortunately, her windows were so tinted that you couldn't tell who was driving or if Aurelie was even in the car. Authorities believe that her car reached the location where it was eventually found between 7:50 and 8:45 a.m. and where it was found is about a 20-minute drive from the general store where it was caught on camera. But what's really odd is that on the day Aurelie disappeared, a Google Maps Street View car just so happened to be driving down Highway 1 in Big Sur, which you would think would be helpful in some way, but it only brings more questions. At around noon that day, the Google Maps Street View car drove by Aurelie's bright red Honda Accord. This was 6 hours before her sister discovered it abandoned. It was parked in front of 2 other cars, a white SUV and a silver sedan, who were all parked at the turnout. Police were able to track those cars down, but it ended up being just a couple of tourists who were taking pictures at the turnout, and they reportedly didn't see anything unusual. Aurelie's family believes that someone else was driving her car that day, because why on earth would she have gone so far away to a place that had no significant meaning to her? And authorities believe that whatever happened to Aurelie that day didn't happen to her in the area where her car was found. Salinas PD has since interviewed dozens of people regarding Aurelie's disappearance, but to this day she has never been found, and there have been no leads in this case. But in a strange twist, some started suspecting that Aurelie's disappearance could be connected to Kaylee Gamble, who disappeared just 5 weeks before Aurelie herself. Kaylee was last seen on August 17, 2022, leaving her apartment in Salinas. She lived less than a mile from Aurelie, but the two didn't know each other. 13 days later, her body would be found at the bottom of a cliff at a turnout on, you guessed it, Highway 1 in Big Sur. It was almost as if someone had pulled over to dump her body off the cliff. She was found just 200 yards from the highway, and at this point in time, it's not known why she was in Big Sur either. Some believe that the two cases might be connected because they were both young girls. Kaylee was 20 and Aurelie was 25. They disappeared within 5 weeks of each other and lived so close to each other. They were both women of color and both had long, dark hair. Although Salinas PD has ruled out any connection between the two, the Monterey County Sheriff's Office says that they won't rule anything out just yet. According to them, even though there isn't any physical evidence tying the two cases together, they do have a lot of evidence in Kaylee's case, so hopefully if they are actually connected, it's only a matter of time before evidence is found in Aurelie's case that can link the two together. But as of today, 2 years later, both cases are still unsolved. There's been no activity on Aurelie's bank account since the day she went missing. Her car was really recognizable and was customized, so if you knew her and knew what she drove, it would be really easy to see her on the road and follow her. It truly makes me wonder if someone did just that. But whoever is responsible for Aurelie's disappearance and whoever killed Kaylee is still out there, and whatever happened to them remains a mystery 2 years later. If you have any information in either case, please contact the number on the screen.
Michael Barrymore blocked me for talking about the mysterious death that happened at his house, so let's recap. And I actually like you, Michael, so kind of wild to block me. It was the early hours of the 31st of March 2001 when a frantic call came into police. The call alerted emergency services to a mansion in Roydon in Essex. And when paramedics showed up, they were like, oh my god, this is actually Michael Barrymore's house. If you didn't grow up with him on telly like I did, he basically was like a massive TV presenter in the 90s, and I guess like a TikToker now. Anyway, he was super big back then, and he was 49 at this point. It wasn't actually Michael that rang police, it was just a guy that happened to be at this like after party at his house. He goes, a fella has drowned in the pool. He was like, yeah, we got him out, but quote, I think the geezer's dead, mate. And like I said, they'd apparently got him out of the pool by the time that paramedics actually got there, but no independent witness ever saw him get in the pool. So who was this victim? Well, he was an absolutely lovely man, father of two, Stuart Lubbock. He was a pretty normal guy, 31 years old. He worked as a factory worker from Essex, certainly not a celebrity type like you'd expect at these parties. Tragically, despite the paramedics absolutely trying their best, he was pronounced dead at the scene. Police questioned the attendees at the party. I believe there was 8 men and also Michael there, obviously because it was his house. They'd met Stuart at this nightclub, and then they'd invited him back for the after party at Michael's mansion. As you'd expect at an after party, people were drinking, so memories were kind of hazy. Michael said he did see Stuart in the jacuzzi messing around, but then he went to bed before any of this kicked off. And some of the eyewitnesses kind of contradicted each other, so it was very confusing for police to work out who was telling the truth. Some were like, yeah, the man was facing up in the pool, some say he was face down. And interestingly, nobody reported seeing him actually get into the water. It was only ever the jacuzzi. So he was taken off for a post-mortem as you'd expect, and they determined that he did sadly drown. But it was the extra findings that really raised eyebrows. Stuart had a bunch of substances in his system as well as alcohol, but even more disturbing than that, his body showed signs of severe internal injuries. Those injuries didn't happen from drowning. The placement of those internal injuries is what's even more crazy to me. They suggested insertion of an object and suggested an SA had taken place. Experts said the extent of trauma was unlikely to have been caused by consensual activity. Then this all turned into a murder inquiry. So it stunned everyone when Michael was arrested in connection with this death, because honestly he was like a household name. But he was then released without charges, and I said this all before, which is why I'm so confused why Michael would block me. ITV terminated his contract, but it was later found that his arrest was unlawful. They apologised and they ruled that there was absolutely no reason to arrest him. The coroner stated though, none of these witnesses who were party guests for 3 hours have given this court an explanation about how Stuart Lubbock, a previously fit 31-year-old, should be found floating in a swimming pool at the premises with a significant level of alcohol and D's in his system and have serious injuries. And Stuart's family have been absolutely beside themselves about this whole tragedy, as you'd expect. Stuart's brother Kevin said there seemed to be a wall of silence surrounding his brother's death. As if your family member dying wasn't bad enough, there were found to be significant police failings in this case. They didn't properly secure the crime scene and preserve evidence, which essentially just messed this whole thing up. Now, a man was later arrested in 2021 on suspicion of murder and indecent assault, but was later released without charge. It certainly feels like there's just not enough evidence to actually convict somebody for this crime. Let me know if you want me to cover this on my podcast, The Bourne Investigation, and do like a deep dive. I'm more than happy to. As it stands, there's no justice for Stuart, and this whole case still really haunts his family.
He went trick-or-treating and would die after eating poisoned sweets. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Timothy O'Brien. On the 31st of October 1974, a man who appeared to be a loving doting father, Ronald O'Brien, took his 2 children out trick-or-treating. This was Timothy and Elizabeth, and alongside Timothy and Elizabeth, one of the neighbours and a couple of their children also went out trick-or-treating, so the whole group went out together. The families were from Texas, and instead of knocking about on their own doors, they decided to go to the next town over. The next town over was a little bit of a more wealthy and posh area, so the group went there figuring that they would probably get some better sweets.
nights. The group would arrive to a certain house, and from the outside it was dark, there was no movement and no sound coming from the home. The children knocked and waited patiently for someone to come to the door, but they never did. With a sigh, they gave up on this house and skipped to the next one, ready to carry on with their night, most of the adults following closely by. Ronald, however, stayed behind. After a couple of minutes of being separated from the group, Ronald caught up with them and told them, "You should have waited. Someone came to the door and they were handing out pixie sticks." Pixie sticks, for those of us that are in the UK, I believe are just like sherbets. Ronald handed one out to each of his children and then his neighbour's children before putting the rest in his pocket to later give to trick-or-treaters that came to his door. At the end of the night, Ronald, Timothy and Elizabeth all arrived back at their Deer Park home, and filled with excitement and probably a lot of sugar, the children begged their father to please let them get stuck in with their sweets, and Ronald agreed, telling them they could each have one each. Timothy went for a pixie stick while Elizabeth went for something else, and almost immediately Timothy began to complain. He said that the pixie stick was sour and bitter and it made his tummy hurt. After only minutes of ingesting it, Timothy began to violently throw before dropping to the ground, beginning to shake and convulse. 911 was called and paramedics raced to the scene, scooping up little Timothy and rushing him to the hospital. However, sadly, 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien would die on his way to the hospital in the ambulance. His autopsy later revealed that he had enough cyanide in his system to kill 2 people. Quickly, the Deer Park and surrounding communities began to learn about Timothy's death, that he had died after eating some of the sweets that he got while trick-or-treating, and this set a panic off within the communities. Police recalled all of the sweets that everyone had collected and began scoping through them all to see if it was just the pixie sticks that was poisoned or if it was other ones. They very quickly realised that it was just the pixie sticks. Whoever had done this had cut the top off, poured in the poison and then just stapled the top back on. After learning this, the police then looked to Ronald. He was the man who got the pixie sticks from that house, and the police wanted Ronald to show them which house it was. Throughout the course of the investigation, Ronald O'Brien was extremely uncooperative. He feigned not knowing which house it was that gave him the pixie sticks. He gave a very vague description of the person. He said he didn't really see the person's face but recalled it was a man who had a hairy arm, and police would actually make an arrest based off of this description, but the man they arrested was very quickly cleared. The investigators began to grow suspicious of Ronald, who was very clearly wasting their time when they were trying to figure out who had murdered his son. He also wasn't acting like how they expected a grieving father to act, and his reluctance to help them just didn't sit right. When they began to dig into Ronald, they would discover that he was in crippling debt. Throughout many credit cards and loans, he was in over £10,000 worth of debt. He was about to lose his job after being accused of stealing from them. He was about to lose his house and his car. And damningly, only the month before Timothy's murder, Ronald had took out a £20,000 life insurance policy on him. Shockingly, not even 12 hours after his son's death, Ronald was ringing up the life insurance policy to try and claim the money. Ronald O'Brien would be arrested and charged with capital murder. His trial was mainly a circumstantial evidence-based one. For example, one of the pieces of evidence that was presented was a pair of scissors that was found in the O'Brien home. When the scissors were examined, they found fibres of plastic, and this plastic matched the plastic that was found on the pixie stick, so they think that Ronald had used these scissors to cut open the pixie sticks to pour the poison in. Evidence such as that and lots of other bits and pieces. In 1975, Ronald would be found guilty of the murder of his 8-year-old son Timothy O'Brien, and he would be handed the death penalty. After sitting on death row for 9 years, Ronald O'Brien would be executed on the 31st of March 1984. Within his final statement, he proclaimed his innocence as he had done throughout his entire time on death row, and he shunned the death penalty.
He disappeared after his car was seen swerving across the highway. Some witnesses say that no one was driving it, but others claim to have seen someone else not matching his description jump out of the passenger seat and run into the woods. This is the mysterious disappearance of Logan Schendelman, and nothing is more bizarre to me than when someone goes missing after crashing their car. There are so many cases like this, it seriously needs to be studied. So 19-year-old Logan was last seen on May 19th, 2016. He lived with his grandma and sister in Tumwater, Washington, and that morning he told his grandma that he would likely be awake away for the entire weekend. Logan never knew his dad and was raised by his grandma pretty much all of his life, even though his mom lived close by in Olympia. His grandma said that on that morning, Logan seemed nervous, which wasn't like his usual self. He said that he had an epiphany about himself, and when she asked him what it was, he said that he couldn't really explain it. She said that they would talk more about this later that night, and then they both went off to work, but this would be the last time that she would ever talk to him. At around 2 p.m. a day later, multiple people started calling 911 after seeing Logan's car swerve across 3 lanes on I-5 near Tumwater and Maytown in Thurston County. People driving by said that it appeared that no one was driving the car, but eventually the car crashed into the center median, and this is where this case gets bizarre. Several people said that they saw a white man with either brown or red hair jump out of the passenger seat and then run into the woods along the interstate. When police arrived, they found Logan's car abandoned near exit 95, but no one was inside. This was about 20 miles from his home. All of his personal belongings were still inside the car, including his wallet, driver's license, and phone. They initially searched for roughly 6 hours in the surrounding woods, but nothing was found or stood out, so they had his car impounded. Meanwhile, Logan's grandma had no idea what was happening until later that night, when Logan never returned home. It wasn't totally uncommon for him to not come home for a day or two being a young kid, but by the next day she had a feeling that something was really wrong. So she ended up tracking Logan's phone to where it last pinged, which was in Olympia, and so she figured that he was just visiting his mom who lived in that area. I didn't even know that this was legal, but apparently the Thurston County Police Department was closed for the weekend, so Logan's grandma had to wait 2 days to report him missing. When she did though, the police told her everything that had happened a few days prior, how witnesses saw his car swerving across the interstate and how his car was impounded later that day after it crashed. This was complete news to her, and this is when she was given back all of his personal belongings. But with all of this information, she was able to report him missing. Logan's uncle, who was a retired Thurston County sheriff, kicked off the search for him, and it was pretty massive and intense. They searched a 2-mile radius around where his car was found, and they specifically focused on the woods alongside the interstate since that's where someone was last seen running into. Authorities brought in cadaver dogs, and they searched by land and air, but absolutely no trace of Logan was ever found. It was like he vanished into thin air. It wasn't until after his disappearance gained some traction on the news that more witnesses came forward, but what they said only adds more mystery to this case. On the morning of May 20th, a witness said that she saw Logan with 2 white men standing at the back of his car. It was parked on the right shoulder of the interstate near where it would eventually be found. She said that as she was coming home that night, she saw his car in the exact same location, only this time the hood was up and no one was there. At this point in time, it didn't look like the car had crashed yet, which is bizarre because others reported that earlier that day is when it did in fact crash. She described one of the men with Logan that day as around 6 feet tall, had blonde hair and a bowl cut, and was wearing a tank top with jean shorts that were too small for him. The other guy she described as having shoulder-length blonde hair and was wearing a flannel with jeans. Authorities later released a sketch of what one of the men may have looked like, but as of today, their identity remains a mystery. Adding to the creepiness of this case is the fact that later that night, the same night that Logan's car was found, there were sightings of a naked teenager in the area, but again, nobody knows who this was, and it was never really investigated. So police started combing through Logan's phone records, which showed him traveling on I-5 heading south that morning, but then for reasons unknown, he turns around and heads back for a little bit before turning back around, eventually stopping where his car was found. Nobody knows if Logan was even in the car that day with his phone, or if it was stolen, and it's just odd that someone who very obviously does not match his description was seen in the passenger seat. Who was that, and what was he doing? It doesn't make sense to me that multiple different people said that it appeared that no one was driving the car. That is so bizarre to me. Police also discovered that just days before he disappeared, Logan texted a woman that he met on a dating app saying, quote, "I hope I survive this week." End quote. Why he said that, no one knows. As of today, Logan remains missing, but there are a few theories as to what could have happened to him. One theory is that he suffered some sort of mental breakdown after smoking. According to his grandma, she knew that at this time Logan had been smoking, and it wasn't anything crazy, but she did worry about him doing this because it seemed to make him a little paranoid at night. He was also going through some personal things, like not really knowing what to do with his life. Logan was a really popular kid who attended Tumwater High School. He was a model student and a star athlete on the football team that everyone loved, but at the end of his senior year, Logan was at a party where a girl made racist remarks to him, and none of his friends stuck up for him, which really hurt him. It affected him so much that he completely cut off his entire friend group, and he made a last-minute decision to enroll at WSU in Pullman, which is over 300 miles away. He went there for a year before deciding to move back in with his grandma and sister in Tumwater. He worked a couple of jobs and stayed relatively busy. Some believe that with all of these sudden changes in his life, mixed with him smoking, that he had some sort of mental break, which caused him to tell his grandma that he had an epiphany that morning. And while this might make sense, it still doesn't explain where he is, or why so many different people saw someone that wasn't Logan driving his car that day. The descriptions are just so far off from what Logan looked like, and it wasn't just one person that saw saw this, it was multiple people, and it was in broad daylight. Another theory is that Logan's sister's boyfriend might have had something to do with his disappearance. Her boyfriend had recently moved into the home with them, and Logan and him reportedly didn't get along. Logan's other family members recall him saying that this boyfriend was a problem, but he wouldn't elaborate more, saying that it seemed like Logan was scared to talk about it. This boyfriend does have a criminal history, but after taking a polygraph and passing, police ruled him out as a suspect. Logan's family has since hired a private investigator, but no trace of Logan has ever been found. Unfortunately, the situation was not handled properly, and since his car was impounded that day, it was never processed by a crime lab, so all potential evidence was either lost or unusable. This is one of the most bizarre cases that I've ever heard of, and it is still unsolved. The fact that so many people go missing after crashing their car is so scary to me. I would do anything to find out what actually happened to them. Whatever happened to Logan that day remains a mystery 8 years later.
This is the story of Paula Cooper. 1985, we going back today. Gary, Indiana, 15-year-old Paula Cooper had a horrible upbringing. Her mother was a heavy alcoholic and her father was barely there, but when he was there, he was abusive to her, her sister, and their mother. It was so bad that Paula and her sister, whose name was Rhonda, she was about 2 years older than Paula, they would run away. They would run away so much that they were called chronic runaways. They were in emergency shelters. They were in foster care. They even stayed in mental hospitals a couple times. They will beg not to send them back home, but each and every time they found themselves back in the same situation. One night when their father came home after being gone for God knows how long, but he couldn't get into the apartment. He forced himself in and he was angry by this point. So he decided to SA the mother in front of the two girls. After that incident, Paula's mother had had enough. She told the girls that they were going to see Jesus. She took herself, Paula, and Paula's sister and placed all of them in a car and turned it on. Paula and her sister passed out, and that's when her mother had a change of heart. So she pulled her two daughters out of the car and drugged them onto the driveway to get some air, and she herself went back into the car. All three survived, but there was never any action taken by law about this situation. They didn't even check on the girls after all this was said and done. A couple months after that, Paula's sister found out that their father was not her biological father. When she found her biological father, she ran away to live with him. This left Paula by herself and the sole focus of her father's attention. With her sister gone, Paula is acting out, getting in trouble, getting in fights, doing drugs, drinking. It was so bad that her father drove her to the woods and beat her for 30 minutes straight. May 14th, 1985, Paula and some of her friends decided to skip school this day. 14-year-old Denise Thomas, 15-year-old April Beverly, and 16-year-old Karen Carter. The girls went to April's house to drink and smoke. Mind y'all, 16-year-old Karen was already a mother. Her child was 3 years old at the time. April, 15, was pregnant at the time. But the group was plotting on a way to get some quick cash. They had already robbed the neighbor's house a week prior. They slipped into their back door and got away with like $90, but that money was long gone. April told the girls that she knew exactly where to get some money and some jewelry from an old lady that lived just around the corner and that her husband just died. So she's there by herself. She said all we have to do is talk to her about Bible study and she will let us in. The girls was down for this plan. Paula went to the kitchen to get a knife and said we could scare her with this and put the knife in her blue jean jacket. April stayed back to keep a lookout, but Denise, Karen, and Paula went to 77-year-old Ruth Pelkey, who was known for helping the children and anybody around the neighborhood, inviting any and everybody to Bible study. Paula, Denise, and Karen knocked on Ruth's door, asking her about the schedule for Bible study class, and she did not hesitate to let the girls in. Once in, she got a pen and a pad and started writing down the schedule. This is when Denise hits Ruth upside the head with a vase, followed by Paula attacking her, asking her where is the money. She asked this several times while cutting her dress, threatening to cut her skin next. When Ruth didn't tell her where the money was, she stabbed her 33 times. The teenagers trashed the house and took anything they could find. They only got away with $10 in cash. They took Ruth's car as well. Ruth's son called her that night and a couple times the next day. When he wasn't able to get hold of her, he went over there. He seen her car was missing, so he thought maybe she was just out. He decided to use a spare key to enter the home to maybe wait for her. But that's when he discovered his mother laying on the floor deceased. While Ruth's body is getting discovered, guess what these four are doing? Driving around in her car, bragging about the crime they committed. All four of these young ladies was arrested the next day because people in the neighborhood told the police exactly what they told them. Each girl took accountability for their role in the crime, so there was no back and forth with that. Their trial was in July of 1986. Denise got 35 years for using the vase on Miss Ruth. April got 25 years for being the lookout. And Karen got 60 years for assisting in the stabbing, which I didn't read about that. That's just what the court docs said. But 15-year-old Paula Cooper was sentenced to death. Now, this caused an uproar, so much so that her attorney was able to get 2 million signatures to fight for Paula's appeal. Even the Pope at that time contacted Indiana's governor trying to get an appeal for Paula. They even got 1 million more signatures for United Nations for her appeal as well. While waiting on a decision about her appeal, the judge in Paula's case ended up dying. It reminds you of the movie Life when Claude and Ray was about to get their walking papers. He died on the shitter. With the death of the judge, this pushed her appeal even further. It was a waiting game. They was waiting to find a new judge for her case. But in 1988, the Supreme Court decision, Thompson versus Oklahoma, barred the death penalty for defendants under the age of 16 at the time of the crime. With this decision, Paula, who is now 19, gets her sentence reduced from death penalty to 60 years to life. But just 27 years later, Paula was released and people were happy she was out. She got her GED. She had high hopes for the outside. She got some hate for her crime when she got out, but it was way more love. But being out in the free world didn't heal Paula like she thought it would. On May 26, 2015, just 2 years later, Paula went up to her friend's job, who's pictured right here, telling her that she just could not do it anymore and that she was hurting from the inside. Her friend thought that she was just having problems at home with her boyfriend, so she invited Paula to come stay with her for a couple days. Later that day, while sitting on a balcony, Paula asked her friend for a piece of paper and some envelopes. She's still not thinking anything of it. Paula's friend woke up the next day with her husband screaming her name. When she went to go see what it was, he gave her the letter that Paula left. She read the first couple lines and ran out the house to search for her. They found Paula under a tree with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Next to her was a tape recorder and more letters to people that she loved. She said she wanted to go where no eyes could see her and that she wasn't worthy of anyone's forgiveness because Ruth's people forgave her too. They even was visiting her in jail. As for the other women, Karen died in jail in December of 2008. April actually got released in April of 1999, but ended up getting killed by her boyfriend. And Denise was released in August of 2003. It's a lot to unpack here, Yellow Tape. What y'all think?